Welcome to The Debate.
Today we're tackling a really divisive piece of wellness gear, the waist trainer. It seems like you either see it as a symbol of discipline and confidence or as a tool of pure misinformation.
Exactly. And to be clear on what we're talking about, this is a compression garment, usually made of latex or neoprene, something with some rigidity, designed to tightly compress the midsection.
Right. It gives you that temporary reduction in waist size. It makes you sweat more in that one area, and it gives you some postural support just by being stiff.
And crucially, let's establish what they are not. They don't permanently burn fat, they do not reshape your bones, and they absolutely do not train your muscles in the way exercise does.
And that distinction is really the heart of it, which brings us to our central question for today. Given the conflict between, the psychological boost some people feel and the potential physical harm, should the marketing of waist trainers as actual fitness tools be restricted or maybe even banned?
I'm going to argue that individual choice, coupled with really aggressive and clear disclosure, should be the way forward. I think the tool has legitimate uses, especially for motivation, that we can't just dismiss.
And I'll be arguing that the misleading claims, the reinforcement of some pretty damaging body ideals, and the very real physiological risks, they all demand stricter corporate responsibility and market regulation.
I see why you prioritize regulation. I do, especially with some of the marketing out there. But let me offer a different perspective, one that's more focused on behavioral science. The main value of the waist trainer, from my point of view, is psychological. The data we have shows that many users report feeling much more confident, and that confidence becomes a powerful motivator. And from a behavioral standpoint, if a tool improves a person's adherence, if it makes them feel good enough to actually stick to their workout or their diet, then that tool has value. Consistency is the hardest part for most people. And we do have to separate dangerous, tight lacing from just moderate short-term use.
Okay.
And there's another point. When they're worn with just light compression, they can offer some valuable postural awareness, a kind of core cueing. It's not strengthening anything, but it's giving you proprioceptive feedback, a physical reminder of where your core should be, which can help reduce slouching. For a beginner, that can be a really useful learning tool.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the behavioral perks outweigh the systemic risks and the flat-out deception. Let me tell you why. The foundational problem here is the ethical failure in the marketing. It deliberately conflates a temporary result, which is just tissue being displaced or fluid loss, with a real fitness result like losing fat.
Well,
waist trainers do not burn fat. They just don't. They make you sweat, sure, but that's water weight. Marketing them for fat loss ignores basic physiology, and frankly, it's a complete failure of corporate responsibility. And what's more critical, the physical risks are too serious to just write off as misuse. Over-tightening it, which the marketing encourages for that visual effect, it fundamentally restricts your ribcage from expanding. It limits diaphragmatic breathing. So your body is forced into these shallow breathing patterns. And the irony is that restriction actively weakens the deep core muscles, specifically the transverse abdominis, the very muscle it claims to support. If you restrict the diaphragm, that muscle, it just gets lazy. So you're basically causing internal sabotage while claiming external support. At what point does that cross the line from personal choice into a preventable health risk?
that's a compelling point on the motivation, and I agree, consistency is everything. But have you considered the full picture? Does that momentary confidence, does it really justify promoting a tool that, once you take it off, just reminds the user of what they don't look like naturally? We have to talk about reinforcing these unrealistic body ideals.
Right.
The hourglass figure is so heavily gendered, and it reinforces this cultural idea that the natural female body is somehow not enough. I mean, yes, compression wear for men exists, but the pressure on women to get this tiny cinched waist is so much more intense. It feels like control disguised as empowerment.
That's a great point, and it pushes us to define the ethical lines here. I agree the cultural context is problematic, but we have to draw a clear line between promoting it for aesthetic or psychological use, which I defend, and making false medical claims, which I condemn. The question is
Is the object the problem, or is it the intent? We use abdominal binders postpartum. We use compression garments after surgery. So external compression isn't inherently evil. The issue is the intent and the misleading claims about fat loss. We can regulate the claims without banning the accessory.
I just come at it from a different angle. If the device, when it's misused, and we know misuse is common because the marketing fuels it, if it can actively undermine your core function by messing with your breathing, then marketing it as a fitness tool is just fundamentally flawed.
But that risk is heavily context-dependent. It really only applies with improper use, like during intense workouts or for hours on end. There are acceptable uses: short-term posture help, occasional aesthetic wear.
Right.
So we have to emphasize autonomy, and adults should have the right to choose what they wear. If they're using it appropriately, light compression, short duration, the risks are pretty minimal. If users are being misled, isn't that a failure of consumer responsibility to do a little research rather than something that requires a total ban?
See, that shifts the burden entirely onto the consumer, and I find that really problematic when the industry is so aggressively pushing misinformation. The issue is just blown up by the social media effect. Influencers are paid to promote these things, often while they're doing these intense workouts, and it just blurs the line between fashion and functional training.
Yes.
And when they don't disclose that the effect is just temporary compression, that's a failure of corporate responsibility to a very vulnerable audience. It sells this idea that sweating more around your waist equals fat loss, which is just false.
I'm just not convinced by that, because we already have rules against false advertising. The solution is mandating clearer, more aggressive disclosure, not a ban. The problem is the claim. So let's regulate the claim, require every ad, especially from influencers, to state loud and clear: results are from temporary compression and fluid loss only. This product does not reduce body fat. That tackles the deception without penalizing people who find it genuinely helpful for posture or motivation. The confidence someone gets, even if it's temporary, is a valid psychological outcome.
But isn't that just rewarding a dependency? If the psychological boost requires this external device, are we really fostering long-term self-acceptance? When the effect vanishes the second the garment is off, doesn't that just reinforce a cycle of body dissatisfaction? That seems like it could cause more psychological harm in the long run.
It could.
And this is why we need action. We have to ask if platforms should regulate these fitness claims more strictly. This is a public health issue when a core trainer actively restricts your breathing. We have to weigh freedom of choice against the responsibility to market things honestly.
So, when you boil it all down, for me, this isn't really about the inherent danger of the garment itself. It's about the education